we don't need the monoclonals to fail for us to succeed. Because we're talking about completely different targets and mechanisms of action, and we're not necessarily looking at the amyloidopathies, that there is this opportunity as those therapies become more refined. And I think I speak for everyone that we really hope for their success. We really hope for that they are proven to be effective and that they're proven to be safe and that they can ultimately be refined in a way to be. Because I think that there are going to be some patients that just are not going to be eligible for those. And we want to make sure that we're providing a solution to meet the patient wherever they are, whether it's their eligibility or lack of eligibility, whether it's the desire to be treated at home. But we do think of them as independent. What I really want to see is I want to see therapies coming to the market to impact your patients, because it's amazing how long they've had to endure without a therapy.
Treating Alzheimer's disease with light and sound. Doesn't that sound exciting? And indeed it is. We've got a very interesting program today, and we're going to be talking to Dr. Christian Howell, who is the CEO of Cognito Therapeutics. And this is a very leading edge company that is the outgrowth of research being done at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, looking at reestablishing something called gamma oscillation in the brain as a therapeutic intervention in a variety of brain-related disorders. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Howell. Dr. Howell, as mentioned, is the CEO of Cognito Therapeutics, and this is a pioneering company at the forefront of neurotechnology, which is developing innovative, non-invasive treatments for a variety of neurodegenerative conditions. He has a deep background in neuroscience, biotech, and leadership, and he's committed to advancing the understanding of brain health and delivering this groundbreaking therapeutic solution to improve patient outcomes. Under his leadership, Cognito Therapeutics has made significant strides in the development of gamma frequency neuromodulation, which is something we'll be talking about today, that uses light and sound stimulation to address the underlying mechanisms of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative disorders. This is a very, very exciting program, and I just can't wait to jump in. Here we go. Well, Dr. Howell, welcome to the program. Great to see you.
It's great to see you. How are you, David?
I'm doing really, really well. Oddly enough, I just finished being interviewed a few minutes ago with reference to how we can affect our metabolism to improve microglial function as it relates to neurodegenerative disease. So my time with you today is perfect because I didn't know how we were going to start, but I guess this is where we're going. One of the things that I found so attractive about the technology that you're going to be describing today is the fact that Dr. Sai has really focused on one of the mechanisms being how it regulates immune cells in the brain. This gamma oscillation regulates the function of these microglial cells, which are really kind of very much front and center right now in terms of neurodegenerative research, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS. But let's wind the clock back a little bit. Researchers at MIT and at other places past decade or so have been exploring the fact that in the Alzheimer's brain, in the rodent model and in humans, that there is a change in this background frequency becoming a little bit more disorganized. And they felt that might be an entry point to reestablishing better brain health. So maybe you could just walk us through the early days of this technology and how sort of the idea of modulating brain oscillation activity was kind of reverse engineering, and then where we come to today with your research studies and the availability of or upcoming availability. Let's go back into the past, though.
Yeah, sounds great. And just one correction. You referred to me as Dr. Howell. I'm not a doctor, but I am very fortunate to be surrounded by them across all of Cognito. And so they have done an incredible job in kind of getting me as educated as possible. But yeah, the history is really an interesting one. The history is there were two sort of pioneering neuroscientists at MIT. There was Dr. Li Wei Sai, who was pioneering this work of 40 hertz gamma oscillation, and this idea that if you could get the neurons of the brain to oscillate at a particular frequency and stimulate them to oscillate at that frequency for a specific period of time, that they would start to express specific genes and proteins and peptides that were critical for brain structure and volume. And then she worked with Dr. Ed Boyden, and Ed was pioneering the idea of optogenetics and using light frequency to target specific regions of the brain. And they knew if they could come together and they could create a collaboration that leveraged um, neuromodulated light frequency at 40 hertz, that they could start to express these really interesting things in the brain. And so that was about 5 years ago, and it got the start of Cognito. And the idea that the question we're trying to answer at Cognito is, what if you could deliver a disease modifying therapy to the 7 million patients that are suffering with Alzheimer's disease using non invasive neurostimulation so that they could receive a safe, effective, cost effective therapy in their home, compared to what some of the challenges we know
Well,
are on the
I
market
think
today.
the idea of effective and safe, those are kind of the
Yeah.
watchwords for us in clinical medicine in terms of intervention. We began with modulating the chemical environment of the brain years ago. It was recognized that the brain is deficient in acetylcholine, so drugs were developed to increase acetylcholine. They didn't work. And then more recently, there's been such an emphasis on this beta amyloid and
Yeah.
lesser emphasis, but still emphasis on tau, phosphorylated tau. So pharmaceuticals were created to reduce the formation of beta amyloid and help rid the brain of beta amyloid. And those have not been really effective in terms of modifying the time course of decline as it relates to Alzheimer's. And to be fair, have been associated with some pretty significant risk. Uh, and you've then working with this technology, you're looking at this from a different perspective. It's been known for a long time that there are brainwave changes in the Alzheimer's brain in humans. And I think the notion was, well, if we can reestablish some harmony, some good activity in the brain that seems to correlate with the normal brain, perhaps we can see some change. And so ultimately, from this was demonstrated in the Alzheimer's animal model in your laboratory or Dr. Tsai's laboratory, and then they ultimately, it looks like, began some human trials, and that's taken us to where we are today. But let's go to the trials and how that, talk about phase one, creation of a trial, and walk us through that. What was the underlying reason for the development of those trials based on the animal work, and how did phase one, proving safety, how did that evolve, and where we are now?
Yeah, no, it's been a really interesting process. And I've got to say that I think they've done an amazing job of, you know, one, we're trying to prove out this idea that um, physics can drive biology, and I think that's been proven out very clearly. And so it started with an initial feasibility study, which was called Flicker, which was really just in 10 patients. And what we were really looking to see is if we could, one, limit the adverse events, and that the device could really be tolerated. And then we moved into much more of a proof of concept study, or a phase two, which was our overture study. And that was 73 patients, and it was randomized and sham controlled. And what we showed there was a very significant impact over the course of 6 months on the preservation of function, the preservation of function measured through the ADL, preservation of cognition measured through the CDR-SB, and then a preservation, or really a preservation of myelin through MRI. And so that really gave us the confidence to move forward into our phase three, or our HOPE study. We did do an OLE on the overture patients, and we were able to show durability for an additional 12 months, so up to 18 months. But it really gave us the confidence that we wanted to move into the HOPE study. So what we've seen in HOPE is we tried to match as much as we could from overture into HOPE. So we are currently, I think, 570 so patients enrolled into what will ultimately be a 670 patient uh, randomized sham controlled 12-month study that is being done over, I think, 60 sites across the United States. So it is a significant evidence demonstration, certainly in the neurotech space. But we think it's going to really prove enormous dividends for us, not only just on showing the safety and efficacy of the the technology, but also position us really to bring some of that evidence to the market in the post market questions that we'll be getting as it pertains to coverage and reimbursement and some of the things. So we wanted to make the evidence investment on the front end so that we are as prepared as possible.
We're really interfacing with you in the sort of in the middle, from the early days of the research, but we're still not yet at availability for clinical application. So we're at this interesting watershed point. But you have demonstrated some pretty dramatic findings in your phase 2 trial that relate to cognitive function. I think you're using the mini-mental status examination,
Yeah.
activities of daily living, but also, I think, quite remarkably, a dramatic reduction in the rate of brain shrinkage, if you will, ventricular
Yeah,
enlargement.
preservation of volume. Yeah, so we showed an almost 70% through the MRI of a preservation of brain volume and myelin preservation, which we're enormously excited about because we think that there's obviously brain volume is everything, but it also gives us an opportunity to look at potentially other neurodegenerative conditions in which we think this sort of preservation of brain structure and volume is
Yeah,
so
and we do see a very good correlation between a brain volume loss and cognitive decline, and across various domains. So the fact that you're flashing a light in people's eyes and playing a specific frequency of sound in their ears is preserving brain volume by that much in a 6-month period or 12-month period.
that was over a 6-month period.
That was the phase 2, so 6-month period, along with a pretty dramatic reduction in the rate of cognitive decline, 75% or something like that?
Yeah, so we showed a 76% in cognition and a 77 in function.
Wow.
Yeah,
So it's why we're together today, because
yeah,
really feel I felt quite compelled to bring this information to our viewers, because I, of course, will compare this to what is being promoted to me as a neurologist in terms of what I should be doing with respect to Alzheimer's patients, and that is to give them medication um, to reduce their amyloid burden. Now, let's just talk about what we're seeing in terms of results. First, about 25 to 28% of these individuals have some significant risk of side effect, which we call ARIA, or amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, which can be small hemorrhages in the brain, other white matter changes in the brain. But new research, where their data was looked at by a third party, revealed that pretty much across the board, these individuals were experiencing, all of them, pretty significant declines in brain volume. And my vis-a-vis my earlier statement that we do see correlation between volumetric changes in the brain and cognitive decline, that's not necessarily a good thing. You demonstrated these 75+% reduction in the rate of cognitive decline in 6 months. The amyloid studies are generally 18-month studies. So for you to say that at the 6-month point is really, going head to head, pretty remarkable. Now, I don't know that you do that kind of comparison, I guess, publicly, but I do,
yeah.
because I'm looking for whatever's best. And on the other side, whatever satisfies above all do no harm. And you've done both. So this is, it's really very, very exciting. You're flashing a light into people's eyes at a specific frequency, and you're playing a sound in their ears at a specific frequency. How on earth can that bring about the changes that you are describing?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a real I don't know if it's a simple elegance or an elegant simplicity to what the way that therapy is driven, but what we know is that if stimulated with light and sound at this interval, at this 40 hertz interval, that the brain begins to reciprocate. The neurons begin to reciprocate that, and they reciprocate it in their oscillation. And so that oscillation then starts to generate real sort of neuroplasticity across the brain. And we know that neuroplasticity is unbelievably important And what it does begin to do is it really starts to begins to sort of key very important biological issue, synaptic genes and proteins, myelin. We're certainly talking about the sort of prompting of the lymphatic system, the expression of the vasoactive intestinal peptide. So all of these begin to happen in return from that stimulation. And so, it's really interesting to me in that, in a healthy brain, many of these things are self-expressive, right? Like our brains are sort of are conditioned, are in a health to be able to do that. And so I sort of love that it's this sort of reprompting of a series of expressions that had already begun and had already existed. And what we're doing is we're really stimulating the brain to do them again. It's interesting. Just really quickly, you mentioned the monoclonal antibodies, and what I like to tell anybody that I speak with is that, you know, we don't need the monoclonals to fail for us to succeed, right? That there is an opportunity because we're talking about completely different targets and mechanisms of action, and we're not necessarily looking at the amyloidopathies, that there is this opportunity for, as those therapies become more refined, and I think I speak for everyone, that we really hope for their success. We really hope for that they are proven to be effective, and that they're proven to be safe, and that they can ultimately be refined in a way to be, because I think that there's an opportunity. There are going to be some patients that just are not going to be eligible for those. And we want to make sure that we're providing a solution to meet the patient wherever they are, whether it's their eligibility or lack of eligibility, whether it's the desire to be treated at home. But we do think that there's an opportunity um, for, I really do think of them as independent. I mean, what I really want to see is I want to see therapies come into the market to impact your patients, because it's amazing how long they've had to endure without a therapy.
Well, I think when you look at the monoclonal therapies, the data would indicate that if you're following the guidelines appropriately, that only about 10% of patients are going to qualify per guidelines to be able to avail themselves of that type of therapy. And those there may be some challenge in the environment to the whole notion of the amyloid hypothesis. We know that amyloid accumulation is neither necessary nor sufficient for the production of Alzheimer's disease, for the setting the environment for that to happen. So, well, hi everyone, Dr. David Perlmutter here. We hope you're enjoying this content, and if you would do so, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you're not already a subscriber to our channel, please consider doing so. We're really grateful to have you as part of our community. So let's get right back to the presentation. And I think that what you've demonstrated is that pretty much across the board in the Alzheimer's patient, there is this disruption of this basal gamma oscillation regulatory frequency. And I think that was the original observation. And I used the term reverse engineer before, probably that's inappropriate, but I think that what the researchers did is they said, is this a manifestation of the underlying degeneration, or could this be somehow playing a causative role and therefore give us an entree to reestablishing brain health? And that's what they did in the rodent model first, and then in humans. And that we had a recent podcast where we interviewed a UCSD researcher who took the information that Alzheimer's patients early on seem to lose their sense of smell. And if he could reestablish and challenge the entorhinal cortex parts of the brain that deal with smell and also memory, with challenging it with various scents during the course of the night, maybe that would be another entree to better brain function, and it proved successful. So I think in a very similar way that's what's happened here. So the researchers looked at the amyloid rodent model and found pretty dramatic findings in terms of amyloid load and in terms of the rodent cognitive function by exposing them to I don't mean to be pejorative about it, but a flashing light and a sound in their ears or in their environment, because it's really elegant. We're going to get to what the technology looks like in just a moment. But then the human trials, as we talked about, began. And it's not just, from my understanding, the uniqueness of a specific frequency across the board. But explain how this intervention is patient specific based upon
Yeah.
their EEG evaluation.
And it's a really important question because you can go on Amazon and you can find lights that'll flash in your eyes, or you can go on, I think that there are radio stations that promote having 40 hertz music. But unless you know that the stimulant is evoking a response in the brain, you don't know for what period of time it is getting that type of response. So one of the things that we did um, in Overture and that we've carried through in Hope is to make sure that we really ensure that one, the patients can tolerate the stimulation. So we want to make sure that they are comfortable sitting for an hour every day with the light stimulant and with the sound stimulant. The vast majority of those patients have no issue with it. We do find if there is an issue, I think it's something that in the potential commercial setting it'll be resolved because it has to do with the ability to hear the tones, and that's a little bit of a challenge with a population that has so much hearing aid and support that we're not able to replicate in a trial device. But then we put the stimulant on and we put the patient on EEG, and we determine that we're getting a gamma response from the patient, and that is unbelievably critical.
So you tune each device for that individual patient based upon doing the EEG and seeing when you're getting the gamma frequency that is the goal.
That's right.
And then they get that device. So it's not as if this is a situation where there'll soon be commercialization and everybody can go online and buy this type of product, even if they don't have Alzheimer's, and think that they're doing themselves good.
That's right. It is a critical element of ensuring that the the therapy, when delivered, is attuned to the specific frequency in which we know we're getting a gamma response. So we have a sense of what that range is, and that's certainly what Dr. Tsai and others have sort of talked about with the sort of broad labeling of 40 hertz. But it doesn't mean that that's where you get that sort of universal response from everyone at that. So we really that personalization is unbelievably important. And now we know, a combination of what is the range in which the stimulant uh, delivers or evokes that type of gamma response, and we know the frequency of the brightness of the lights and the sound, so we can really personalize that device for each patient.
Mhm.
Those settings are then sent back. We personalize the device, and the device is then sent to the individual patient. So I really do believe it. You know, we talk about other solutions in the market. Those solutions can be pretty challenging and burdensome given the amount of imaging requirements, giving some of the biomarkers that are required. This we expect to be very, very straightforward. We expect it to be, an MMSE, and then we expect it to be. We have been enriching our population for 180 for PTL 181, so that we'll come to see whether that's going to be a part of the label. But then the patients will then be referred to this tolerance and gamma response, and then the device would be sent to the patients.
Tell us about the device. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah. So in the trial, there, this is the device I think you're going to show that is the commercial ready device, and so the device has a set of goggles and has a set of earphones that patients wear. They sit with it for an hour a day. The patients that are currently in our research, it's a little bit more burdensome in the devices, but this will be very at home friendly. There will be a charging station. Patients will put it on. It is self prompted, so it'll give patients guidance on when their session is starting, how long they have in the session, if they want to take a very small break during the session. We fully expect, or our intentions are, when this comes to market, that they'll have options as it pertains to an occluded goggle or one that they can see through. Some patients they find it, the term we've heard in much of our in our UX has been that it's very meditative, that it's a part of my day. I get up, I have breakfast, I then go sit with my Spectris. I sit for an hour, and then I get my day going. I feel very proactive in the taking on the management of my disease or condition. In an open view lens, they would be able to read, they would be able to see the TV, they wouldn't be able to hear the TV because we are providing the sound stimulant. And then what we have found is once patients develop this as a part of their day to day behaviors, the adherence is very, very high. So we have adherence, in the Overture study north of 80%, where we have same or better. We're in our expectation of hope. So, and that's in a trial setting where I think in a commercial setting we'll be able to provide even more support to um, to the patients and to their partners that are providing them support in this.
So you mentioned that this is a sham-controlled study. It's not just
Mhm.
choosing two populations. So the sham-controlled people get the headset as well, but they're not. What are they receiving? Anything?
So I want to be careful not to get too close into unblinding of the study, given that it's ongoing. But yes,
Oh, okay.
there's no differentiation between the active and the sham. The only way that we know, to your point previously, is we know that we're not putting it in a range in which we're seeing an EEG response.
Okay.
So that's the only that is really the only thing that can tell you a difference between a sham and a active is whether the active is set to a stimulation level in which we're seeing the gamma response on the
So
EEG.
again, the production of that gamma response on the EEG is really central mechanistically to the success of the whole program, isn't it?
100%.
Understood. Now, what about people who might have photostimulated epilepsy?
We've not, so thus far, we've had no issues with any serious adverse events or adverse events that have called into question or a risk for us in that case. So I'm sure it is something that we will continue to study and explore, but to date, whether it's through Overture or what we've experienced in Hope, we've not had any adverse events associated with.
Hmm. You had mentioned that you are still recruiting subjects for the trial.
We are, yeah. So we it's funny. We're or I guess we're hopeful. We're coming up on the end of the study, so
I
we
love the
are
acronyms. Every
right.
study
So
has. It used to not be that way.
it's really ubiquitous, right? I mean, it really you get to use it all the time, but it's so we have about 100 more patients. But again, like my big belief, I was really lucky. Prior to joining Cognito, I worked for a company called Aetion, which was focused on real world data and real world evidence. And one of the members of our board was Dr. Scott Gottlieb, and he used to talk about that the evidentiary burden for biopharmaceuticals was in the pre-market, and a lot of the evidentiary burden for devices was in the post-market. And what I've really tried to be very purposeful here is that we think about a full product lifecycle evidence strategy. And so we don't find ourselves post-market looking to generate evidence. And I say that because yes, we're currently enrolling and continuing to enroll in our trial, but we're going to continue to do research against this. We want to better understand dosage. We want to better understand impact into. We're in a mild to moderate patient population now. We're 60% mild, 40% moderate. We want to understand the impact as we move into mild cognitive impairment and potentially a little bit more upstream in the neurodegenerative space. So I say
That's
that
my
because
next question. What about subjective cognitive impairment? What about people who feel that they're cognitively intact and want to do what's best for their brain? It seems to me that if mechanistically you're improving blood flow, you're helping revert microglia back to their M2 phenotype, you're stimulating neurogenesis, you're stimulating synaptogenesis, you're helping with blood supply, that all of these things would be good to have on board if I were 30.
Really welcome to what I feel like is my largest sort of. I was just having this conversation earlier today with a real global leader in healthcare talking about what I view as my sort of responsibility and privilege in this sort of stewardship and leadership of this company, which is I do believe that there are pathways in which specters can be enormously beneficial from a therapeutic perspective, like we're talking about in Alzheimer's disease. I believe that there's opportunities where specters can be enormously beneficial in a preventative, like what you're talking about, and looking at. And then I think that there's even places where this type of technology can be used in performance enhancement. And so I think, what we want to be is really, we want to be really thoughtful, and we want to be led by the science. We want the science to tell us where do we, what is viable, whether it's from the vasoactive or the glymphatic or the glial or whatever the science is informing us. We want to make sure that marries to clinical need, right? We really want to make sure that we're solving major problems in healthcare and public health, and then we want to make sure that there's candidly a market opportunity for it, that there's a way of bringing this solution to patients. And then, what I think is also a really interesting aspect of this company is that there's strategic partnerships in it. That there are opportunities, that we're not alone in exploring this. That there are federal organizations, there are private organizations, there are other companies that we can collaborate with to think about combination therapy, or bringing this technology to patients earlier in their disease progression. So it really is something we want to be very, very thoughtful about, because I think you and I are of the same page, which is the opportunity here, with a dexterity or the agility of a therapy like this, given its potential clinical impact and its safety, is really incredible. And we want to be thoughtful about how we explore that.
So I'm working on a book that deals with microglial cell, reprogramming them back to being more involved in more salubrious form, as opposed to being the evil twin. And there are probably close to 30 disease states that are characterized by this dysregulation of
Yeah,
microglial function. So I think, the world is wide open as it relates to any technology that has as one of its mechanisms the idea of reverting microglia back to being their M2 phenotype or the supportive phenotype. One area that is getting a lot of attention related to microglia is long COVID. And I'm wondering if there's any interest in that amongst the board, or amongst people who are deciding where
there
to go
is.
with this.
It's one of these things that's amazing to me, and I don't want to dismiss long COVID, because it is absolutely a place where it's been brought to our attention, and we're starting to see early preclinical work in long COVID, and I think that will inform the potential clinical work that we're going to do. I also think we're incredibly blessed as an organization that we can very seamlessly take the preclinical evidence into a clinical environment. I'm incredibly empathetic for my uh, biopharmaceutical partners, just how cumbersome and expensive and the generation of clinical evidence has become. And I think we have a real opportunity to showcase some of the capital efficiencies that we can do in bringing these therapies to market. But long COVID is one that we've talked about. Chemo brain is another that has come forward. Even sepsis is one that has come forward. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited about scientists like yourself and neuroscientists and neurologists continuing to explore what we think these sort of key tenets of brain health are, and then correlating them to areas in which we can be impactful.
Well, the beauty of your technology is you've demonstrated on the front end the safety, and that opens the doors. My understanding is that you did receive a sort of an accelerated FDA device approval. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not. I wouldn't call it accelerated as much as I would call it prioritized. So
Right, George.
what we
Okay,
received was a breakthrough dezegation
got it.
from the FDA. It is, within the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, there is a designation in which this allows you really just a higher level of connectivity of touch with the FDA. And I'm going to tell you, I've really encouraged my team and myself to take advantage of that. I do believe that one of the challenges as the monoclonals came to market is there did seem to be a real disconnect between the endpoints and the way things were being developed, and it created this sort of, when it got to the most important, it just felt like there was a lack of fluency,
Yeah,
candidly, between the two groups,
and
and
transparency.
lack of and for me it's the exact opposite. We and it was really, I got to see this firsthand in the work that I did with the FDA around real world data and real world evidence, that there is this very sort of collaborative spirit. I mean, without question, I find the folks at the FDA to be of the highest sort of ethical standard. But there is a real collaboration. They want to guide companies to bring safe and effective technologies to market, and I think the breakthrough does an incredible job of that, of being able to proactively ask questions. So what we don't operate candidly, we don't operate in the dark in our interactions with the FDA. If the organization has a question, if we want to know about our endpoints, or if we want to have a question about the device, or we want to get their perspective on different measures, we can in a very sort of organized and accountable way get in front of the FDA and spend time with them. And it has been unbelievably um, informative and guiding for us. And it, for me, gives me great, it just gives me improved confidence that, I, we certainly hope that the study reads out, and we certainly hope that we collect the clinical evidence necessary to make our case. But I won't be making the case in the dark, right? I'll be making the case with a real clarity to what the FDA wants to see in a submission for a device like ours, and that's just it's just enormous for somebody in my shoes trying to lead
Yeah, in your position.
an upstart.
And there hasn't been so much clarity in the past as it relates to development and approval of therapies for Alzheimer's. That said, you had mentioned that you're still recruiting. And how could any of our viewers or loved ones
Yeah,
of individuals, where can we go? Where can they go rather to have somebody participate?
it's a great question. So they can go onto our website and onto cognitotx.com, and you'll see.
Cognitotx.com. That should appear on the
Yep.
bottom of the screen right now. And
And then
that's
you
where they
can
can
go
go
right to
ahead.
the clinical study section, and there's a link there for the HOPE study, and that will take them in. I believe they can also go to clinicaltrials.gov,
Oh,
and
good.
clinicaltrials.gov can also guide them there as well.
The next question I had is, as you know, that moment just before you fall asleep and you're lying back thinking about what if, has there ever been any consideration if, in fact, there is some benefit to just broadly being exposed to 40 hertz light and or sound, that beyond just the goggles or that hardware, that there could be incorporation of that type of experience into an environment like a classroom, or build it into a video game, or somehow have it just be something that people could experience kind of, maybe the word is passively, just
Yeah.
be part of their environment.
Yeah, it's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about,
Really?
right? Because what we wanted, we were really intentional in the way we designed this headset for this patient population. So when we decided to lean into Alzheimer's, what we heard was, if you're going to ask a patient with mild to moderate Alzheimer's to wear, it has to be intuitive, it has to be self-guided, it has to be comfortable, it has to be right. So that was really the founding UX for us on the design of that user experience. But as we think about other disease states and conditions, that UX environment changes,
Mm,
right? And so so as it pertains to, there are some limitations in the delivery of of ambient noise, and wanting to make sure that you have the ability for good, but it does broaden. So we've certainly thought about, what if we had the ability to deliver in a much more in sort of environmental
mm.
perspective. And it's also not lost on us that um, you know, AR, VR headsets are becoming much more. You're seeing smart goggles, you're
Yeah, sure.
seeing, right, all of this stuff sort of coming to market. And I think as we think about what the future of the company is going to be, I think we have to be thoughtful about, again, if my responsibility is to make sure that we get what can be a very meaningful therapeutic to patients that can, or to individuals that can benefit from it, then I have to make sure that the delivery modality also provides that type of, that type of ubiquity, that they can get it wherever, whatever's available to them.
The people in this study who may have moderate Alzheimer's disease, and as such may have issues with understanding or activities of daily living, putting on the device, etc. So, is there a requirement that they have somebody help them or be available to
Yeah.
put the
So
device on?
in the study, we have a caregiver requirement, and so we want to make sure they have a partner that can help them. When the product comes to market, we will, there will be the ability to provide a lot more um, independent support through a connected device and through
Mm.
asynchronous tutoring and dealing with um, remote support and dealing with there's a lot of programs coming out from CMS to make sure that there's care in the home provided to those that are challenged with cognitive impairment. So we think in the what will ultimately and hopefully be the commercial expansion of the product, there will be a lot of ways that we can support those that might not have that, but to make sure that we had reliable uh, data collection in the study, we did ask for a caregiver to be there, a partner to be there to support.
Let's play it forward for a moment. FDA says this thing's terrific. We're all, totally supportive, approved. Where do we go? Where do you go next as it relates to, for example, Medicare coverage, private insurance coverage, and getting this really out to the population? How does that? What are the mechanics of that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it is something unique about a medical device, right? Like there's been a lot written about medical devices, and it goes back to the comment about evidentiary burden or preparedness. And what happens to a lot of medical devices is they receive regulatory approval and they don't have the data necessary to receive coverage. And so they
Mm.
enter what is often called the valley of death. And the average time for a medical device now in the valley is 4.7 years. So you think about devices like Spectris AD, you can't expect somebody that's in need of it on day one to wait almost 5 years for that therapy. And so there's been a real movement underfoot by the federal government and by CMS and by the past administration and the incoming administration to make that to really bridge that valley. And so you've seen things like parallel review from CMS on technologies that can be really meaningful to start looking at the data early. Things like TSET, which is transitional coverage for emerging technologies. That's a more narrow program, but it's for devices like ours that are breakthrough, so that they can gain coverage almost concurrent with FDA approval. And then there's two bills going through both the Senate and the House right now that are bipartisan, which is I think a real rarity in this day and
In
age
and of
that
itself.
are yeah. So it's the patient ensuring patient access to breakthrough technologies, and the idea here would be, one of the challenges of TSET is it's not funded to be able to support more than 5 or 6 devices a year. This would provide the funding so that any device that is deemed as being approved by the FDA through a breakthrough status would immediately go into for a concurrent or within 6 months of it. So I think look, I think all of those are a clear indication by the market that one, it goes to our earlier conversation. We believe physics based interventions can drive biological change. We believe oftentimes that they can do it in a safer and in environments in which we want those patients to receive their therapy, like their home. We need to make sure that those therapies receive coverage. We need to make sure that they're not overly burdened with trying to demonstrate their value. And so let's create pathways in which they can get to patients, and then we still believe in maintaining the responsibility of generating evidence and showing that we're driving value both on the numerator of clinical outcomes and on the denominator of economic outcomes. But let's get these to patients, and I think that's what you're seeing. And I think this also aligns well with what we're hearing from the incoming administration. So that's the path. And look, I think both CMS, what we've heard from both CMS and certainly what we've heard from private payers is the potential health economics of Spectris meet or are under the threshold for what they think about this patient population. So I think you're going to see I'm hoping you see a real proactivity
Yeah, well, annual expenditures for Alzheimer's in America is somewhere around $340 billion, and involves another 11 million individuals serving as unpaid uh, caregivers. So the emotional, social, and economic burdens are huge. My hope is that those are considerations, in terms of looking at overall the kind of the overriding perspective view of a development like this. So it's really quite astounding what you've created, and yet sort of considering the hurdles that you've got to look at in front of you, especially in the context of the notion that when you look at the monoclonal antibody data, it pretty much lines up showing what we've always known about the time course of Alzheimer's disease, and that is that people kind of after diagnosis they compensate for a period of time, and then generally somewhere between 12 and 15 months into it post diagnosis, they decline very rapidly. And what that says to me is that uh, if there's a feed forward process happening here where um, call it microglial activation, whatever it may be, starts to enhance its own forward worsening or decline. But beyond that, in the context of your approval and availability of the device, time is of the essence.
Yeah, I mean that's really what the. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Right, like for us, it is. Um, we take nothing for granted, and we certainly appreciate that there are very clear obstacles that we have yet, from a regulatory perspective, from a readout perspective, and from a coverage perspective. And so we are. We used to have a great phrase in the Navy, which was, do not expect to rise to the level of your aspirations, but to sink to the level of your preparations. And so
Fair enough.
that
I
that's
like that.
that's how we sort of lean into this. Is we want to be as prepared as possible for running a sound study, for making sure that we have a robust and informed interaction with the FDA, and to make sure that we're making a case for. We want to take nothing for granted, is my way of saying that. But I do think if we can achieve those goals, I think there's just an opportunity to positively impact millions of people.
Yeah,
I mean, that
and
it's very rare to be able to sit in a chair and say that, to be able to say, like, I do believe if the therapy comes to market.
it's why you're here today. I've done a bit of a deep dive into everything that this company is about, and yeah, it does take my breath away a little bit because it's a bright light in a pretty dismal looking panorama around us as it relates to specifically Alzheimer's. And so there's hope. And gosh, I congratulate you for being steering this ship and reining in all the science and the scientists. That must be a bit of a challenge while you're managing a business as well. So good on you. I'm proud to know you.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. It's we couldn't be more excited about what we're setting out to do, and I appreciate your advocacy and your promoting of what we're trying to do. I think the more people that can learn, we don't want to be a stealth company, because we recognize the power of hope for patients. And so, you know, I take nothing for granted, but I do want people to understand that there is a really impactful thing around
You
the corner.
bet. Well, let's do this. Let's plan on getting together in a year or
That'd be great.
two, and see how far, what the study has shown and where you are on the process as it relates to approval and as it relates to coverage. But it's great to know that those things may be happening in parallel and not sequentially. So I'd love to check back with you, and I'm looking forward to it.
David, that'd be great. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
You bet. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.
Talk soon. Bye bye.
Again, light and sound being given to individuals through the device that we learned about today to help their brains recover as it relates to neurodegenerative issues and other issues as well. We're going to hear a lot more about this technology very soon. And it looks as if it's being fast tracked to approval so that it is something we can then utilize clinically. And very, very exciting. Again, the information is at Cognito Therapeutics. Very grateful for Dr. Christian Howell to join us today. We'll be hearing a lot more about this technology soon. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Thank you for joining us here on The Empowering Neurologist, and we'll be back soon. Bye for now.